To the ongoing NATO summit at Vilnius, NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg says Ukraine is closer to NATO than ever before during a news conference with President Zelensky. He says the accession process has been shortened and Ukraine will become a member, but does not specify a timeline. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden met with President Volodymyr Zelensky in a meeting in which his aide said he was straightforward and candid with the Ukrainian leader. There is more in the following report.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has held NATO and G7 defense packages for Kiev, but says an invitation to join the alliance, quote, would have been ideal. Meanwhile, NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg told reporters that, quote, Ukraine is now closer to NATO than ever before. In a joint press conference with President Zelensky at the Military Alliances Summit, he told President Zelensky, quote, I look forward to the day we would meet as allies. President Zelensky also said the results of the NATO summit are good, with allies pledging more defense packages. Volodymyr Zelensky also met with U.S. President Joe Biden and other NATO leaders in Lithuania, as Kyiv continues to see additional support in its defense of Russia's year-long invasion. President Zelensky arrived in Vilnius, where he was set to meet President Biden, as well as leaders from Canada, Germany, Britain, Netherlands, and Japan, after NATO allies on Tuesday released a plan for Ukraine's eventual admission into the military alliance and support for its efforts against Moscow. President Zelensky also met with Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in one of his bilateral meetings on Wednesday. In his meeting with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, President Zelensky said Kiev secured a new agreement to receive more Patriot defense missiles from the country. The meetings come a day after NATO voted to approve a package that puts Ukraine on the path of eventual membership into the military alliance, after meeting certain conditions which President Zelensky criticized as absurd. Meanwhile, Russia and China have decried the UK and global allies' plans to unveil new long-term security assurances for the Far East. Australia, the UK, and Germany are among nations at the NATO meeting to have promised further military aid to Ukraine.
Joining us to discuss the second day of the NATO summit is global affairs analyst Shahzada Rahim. He joins us live from Turkey via Skype. Thank you for joining us on The World Now. Well, today the NATO summit will be coming to a close, and we know that President Zelensky went into it with high hopes of key time frame of joining NATO, but it didn't exactly seem to go that way. What do you make of how it has turned out now?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. First of all, we have to understand, the NATO summit, which began yesterday, the focal discussion of this NATO summit was the accession of Sweden, not Ukraine. Ukraine has been, just cheering up this false hope, through the media campaigns and, with the help of Western media, it will get the membership quickly. But we know that, NATO has certain rules. There are some pre-accession, conditions which Ukraine doesn't fulfill because the country is in war. And it is in war with the largest nuclear power in Europe. So it's not easy, to get Ukraine quickly into NATO because it will trigger a nuclear war between NATO and Russia. So this was obvious, but Zelensky had very high hopes, maybe there might be a timeline for the Ukraine's accession to NATO. But the focal discussion we have seen in the yesterday summit, where President Zelensky was absent, he came today to attend the summit. Yesterday, the whole discussion was surrounding Sweden, and we see there were meetings between the NATO chief and other NATO leaders with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, to get his confidence to get Sweden into NATO. So they get the green light. So the main discussion ended with Sweden, not with Ukraine. Though most of the countries like France and Germany, they pledged for more aid to Ukraine in order to fight the Russia. But we have seen like the front line is very heated up now because
Yeah.
the Russians are saying like, according to Russian sources, they are going to launch their counteroffensive because the counteroffensive of Ukraine, which started on June 4, and there were high expectations from the NATO members. Maybe like, there was a timeline, in 1 week, like the counteroffensive will achieve some kind of results. But the counteroffensive didn't achieve any result. As a result, like 26,000 Ukrainians died in just one month. So it was a huge tragedy. So the NATO member understood this. So they said, the country is in war, so we cannot we cannot took into NATO because it will trigger a all-out war with Russia, which would be a disastrous for both Europe, America, and Ukraine. One more thing I want to add here is like, if we see like the NATO bloc, like, concerning Ukraine, the NATO is not united. They are divided. We see Poland and Lithuania. They want a quick accession of Ukraine into NATO. But we see on the part of Germany, France, and United States, which doesn't want Ukraine in the current form or in the current shape to be part of NATO. So because if you bring the NATO, Ukraine right now into NATO, that means you're accepting the existing border because Russia still controls like more than 23% of the territory in Ukraine. That means you're just getting into the Western Ukraine into NATO. So it will create a further hurdle for both NATO and the future peace process in this whole episode.
Yeah.
So Zelensky like went with the high hopes, but he didn't get anything except like few pledges from the Western leaders, including the Emmanuel Macron, who said, they will send like long-range weapons, like scalp missiles, like it's same like the Storm Shadow of the UK, which they have sent like a few months ago.
Absolutely, yeah, Mr. Rahim. And then, it's quite important because to join the military alliance, unanimity is very important. All 31, or is it 32 now, member countries of the bloc need to agree that a new country wants to join and, give their support for that to go ahead. But as it is, we've heard the NATO chief himself say Ukraine is closer to NATO than ever before. And that the fact that Ukraine would eventually become a member. It's unclear when that would happen, but they all seem to be in total support of Ukraine. And then they are also sending more defense packages to support the country in its conflict with Russia. So it does appear that Ukraine is actually enjoying the support of the globe, don't you think?
Yeah, like, if we talk about the globe is too much big. Like, if you see, like, who are the primary supporters of Ukraine are the 50 countries, like, with the colonial past, especially in the western part of the world, which are the allies, like, ranging from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, like Australia. I will not include New Zealand because they haven't given any package, but the Australia was, like, the Australian Prime Minister was in the NATO summit, though they are not formally part of NATO. They were there to show their support to the Zelensky. So, regarding the world, like, the whole global south, if you see the global south, like, they are either neutral or either with Russia. So the problem here is like the Western, like, the global South is saying, like, we have seen like few weeks ago, like the African leaders, 6 delegation of the African leaders came to Moscow. They in Moscow and Kiev, like with the peace proposal. But the peace proposal didn't succeed. And China also presented its own proposal. Brazil also presented. So the global South is like a bit fed up with this conflict. They want this war to end as quickly as possible because it's creating a huge disruption in the global supply chains, like important things such as like food and energy. Like if this crisis go on like this, then it will create a huge trouble for the world economy and for the world security as a whole. So what we have seen like today, like, the whole discussion at the Vilnius summit was like, it's just to show the Russia, like, the NATO countries are with Ukraine and they will support Ukraine as much as it takes, like, as long as it takes, like, and they will keep their supporting, like, in terms of weapons and money.
All right. So finally, your thoughts now, as President Zelensky returns to Kiev, do you see this support he has gotten now from the NATO summit? Do you see it boost his country's confidence in its counteroffensive against Russia?
I don't think so. Because we have to understand the realities on the battlefront. We have seen, like, the Russia is more powerful now because the Russian military right now, the Russia has built up, like, if you see the military build up, like 150,000 soldiers are still waiting inside the Russian borders to receive orders from the Kremlin to get into the battlefield and just start the offensive. And the Ukrainians are very weak. Okay, the Western countries are supporting weapons, but these weapons are they're useless when it comes to the defensive weapons of the Russia. They have the most upgraded weapons. So the thing is, it was a mass suicide from the very beginning. And I don't understand. It was much they started advertising this from last 6 months. And when this counteroffensive finally began on June 4th, everything was bogged down. The morale among the Ukrainian military was very low, and the Russians were defending very bravely, but what I want to mention here is it was very miscalculated thinking on behalf of the Western analyst or the military expert. They thought the Russians will flee when the counteroffensive will begin. They will abandon their positions. But we have seen if you see the battlefield, there are 3 lines of defense the Russians have built, mining the whole region. So it's very difficult for the poor Ukrainians to face such a onslaught on the battlefield, because the Russians have prepared very well the whole battlefield. So the NATO understands this, but they want a deal from Moscow, but in the Western terms, or on the terms of the Ukrainian.
Yes.
But the thing is, the Zelensky, when it comes to Zelensky thinks the counteroffensive will continue, but at what cost? He doesn't understand, because 26,000 soldiers just died in 1 month, as I mentioned earlier. So it's a huge bloodbath for the Ukrainians. Yeah.
Okay then. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. Global Affairs Analyst Shahzada Rahim joining us from Turkey.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.